Hey guys, it's Jacob for TCG Buzz, and I am here to show you one of my favorite decks I've been playing for Buddy Fight. I took this deck to regionals and it performed really, really well, even though we didn't quite make top 8. That being my Magic World Shadow Shade deck. Yes, I'm doing a Shadow Shade deck profile in 2019. What a world we live in. Let's go. All right, let's get into this meme. Shadow Shades are so much fun to play. This is probably the deck build of all the decks I brought to regionals over the years, this is the one I'm most proud of. It is so fun to play. Dalton wants a shout out for pointing me towards playing Shadow Shades, so I'll give him it. So we start off here with our buddy, Silhouette Joe. Nothing else could be your buddy. There are literally no other monsters in the deck that enter the field. I'm not joking. This is the only monster in the main deck you will ever call. We have our flag. Ooh, look at that flag. Sure, it's not, what's his buddy? What's Joe's buddy's name? I don't even know. But I had to, you know, rep my 72 pillars just a little bit while playing it. We have 4 copies of Joe. He is so good. One of the best size 3s in the game right now. He has his weaknesses. He's kind of a glass cannon, but that's okay. So he costs 2 gauge, and you put a spell into his soul from the drop. Okay. And then he protects himself from being nullified, and he prevents any damage being dealt to you by card effects. That's important because burn damage is kind of big right now, and penetrate's kind of big right now. And the big thing with him is it's not the double attack soul guard. Who cares? It's the ability. So at the start of either player's attack phase, put a card from your drop zone into his soul and deal 1 damage to your opponent. This is a great clock for the 1 damage. And frankly, if by turn 2 you don't have like 50 cards in his soul, you're doing something wrong, man. I am exaggerating. You should have like 6 or 7 in his soul. So he's fantastic. He just walls out the opponent. You know, when you can sit there with a monster on the field and your opponent's in their size 6 max dragon hitting, you know, what, 50 billion times with penetrate with massive crit, and their attacks just do nothing, you know the card is good. Next, we have our second monster in the deck, who's really not a monster. He's more a spell. We have Silhouette Simbar. He's got an axe skill, discard it from your hand, choose another Shadow Shade monster, put it in your hand. It's really good. There are so many different archetypes that would kill to have this card. It is ridiculously good. It is kind of bad when you're bricking, but you've got so much draw power in this deck, you're not bricking. Next we have the real main star of the deck, Silhouette Olivar. This card is actually kind of hard to get right now. It was in, I want to say, Buddy All-Stars. And it is kind of short printed, to be honest. And like copies are $6, $7 a piece minimum if you can find them. It's hard to get, but I've got my 4 here, and he is oh so good. So axe skill, place him from the hand into the soul of a Shadow Shade monster. And then when he would leave any soul, you gain a gauge, gain a life, draw a card. The big thing with that is no once per turn. You can keep doing it. That's amazing. The other thing is he does give a power boost and penetrate and all that jazz, but honestly, the Dragon Emperor Legend 3-4 times in a turn is the best part of him. He is the MVP of the deck. Particularly the goal of this deck is to draw out Lost World, and if you've got your Joe set up with your Olivars, it's a better draw engine than Dimension Dragons. It's fantastic. Next, we have the classic, the staple, nice one. Pay a gauge, draw 2 cards once per turn. It's that simple, and yes, it is still a fantastic card in 2019. It is literally no worse than it was when it first came out. It is so, so good. And of course, I gotta use the alternate art with Joe and whatever his name is. I don't remember, but I had to use the matching art. And typically, I just use 72 Pillars meme art, but had to make an exception in this case. Next, we have their most recent support card outside of the Joe. Their set spell, which is incredible. We have 4 copies. Let's see. It prevents your souls from being dropped, which is important. It doesn't protect against a Thora SD, but that's okay. You want your things to go back to hand. And its second skill is at the beginning of your attack phase. Put the top card of your deck into your monster's soul, and then choose any card from the soul, put it into your hand. Oh, so good. Like, I can't even overstate, like, how good it is. You know, when you're essentially toolboxing out anything from the soul every turn, you can grab back your Lost World, you can grab a Sephiroth's Lecture, you can grab a nice one for next turn, you can grab tons of things. It is so good. You can I've grabbed Loyalty out of the soul and just seen my opponent's face go, uh-oh. Next, we have 4 copies of Little Light. Choose a monster from your deck and put it into your gauge or drop zone, and then gain a life. It's a good setup card, particularly you want to mill out Olivars, or it's a kind of clunky searcher for Joe. Unfortunately, it's the only searcher for Joe. You can mill it out into your drop zone and then use Simbar to bring it back to hand, but only if you're desperate. But it is a fantastic card. I also find that the life gain is not too relevant because you never get damaged with this deck, but it's cute. And next we have one of the best cards ever. We have Sephiroth's Lecture. You can cast it if you've already cast a spell. Counter, check the top 2, 1 to hand, 1 to gauge. You don't have to reveal. You can just use this to keep chaining into more draw spells on your turn or as a defensive measure during your opponent's turn. And it is a fantastic card just in general. Next, we have the Shade. This is the archetype draw card for Shadow Shades. You gain a gauge, draw a card, put it into the soul. It's a good card. Next, we have Loyalty. I do mainboard Loyalty, and I mainboard it at 3 just because this is a Stally control deck, so you want that counter to the aggro decks. I would not be offended if you ran this only at 2 in mainboard and 1 inside, or even just at 2 in general, but I don't find it very clunky at 3. Next, we have Infector, one of the most important cards in the deck because your Joe has no native protection to destruction, so use this, counter cast it, and your thing can't be destroyed for the turn by card effects. This also works to protect your set spell. It's a good card. Next, we have probably my favorite card in the deck, and the most recent addition. We have Bird Magic Experimental. This card can only cast it if you meet its conditions, then you counter. You can choose to either stand a card on your field, that's great for when you're in Lost World, or give your opponent's thing a stat reduction. It's just a solid card. Honestly, I use the first ability more than anything else, because this deck does struggle with being aggressive and actually doing damage, so this is a big help with that. But its defensive ability is also very useful. I'm a big fan of this card. Next, we have Abracadabra at 2. Love my foil copies. Do I even need to say anything? Spell Null. Come on, it's a Spell Null. Next, we have Fake Out. I only run 2. I feel like there are 2 types of people. People who love Fake Out, people who hate it. I love Fake Out, but it is extremely bricky at 4. So it is here at 2. I don't know. If you wanted to drop it, you could, but I love it. It's such a good card. It's your only nullify in the deck, fun fact. Next, we have Time Sale at 2. This deck's focus on drawing. It makes sense. There was one time I actually did get to cast it for free. You're never at the life total for it. Consider switching one of these Time Sales out, though, for a no pain, no gain. That's also a fantastic card, but I'm currently running this at 2 instead. Next, we have Recover Veil at 2 copies. You're going to say maybe, hey, Jacob, why is that card in your deck? Well, it's a good counter for specific matchups, and the actual skills on it, besides the anti-discard effect, are good enough. Particularly, this deck does struggle sometimes to gain the gauge it needs. It needs some sort of gauge-gaining card at a couple copies, and this one does the job while also making extra space in your sideboard for spicy plays. I am kind of bugged that one is foiled, the other's not, but I'm working on getting that second one shiny. Next, we have one copy of Teleclair. Yeah. It's your counter rest card. It's very important, but it is only at 1 just because the deck's already very defensive, and you can draw it easily, but there, spoilers, isn't a second copy in the sideboard. Next, we have one copy of Holy Magic. Some players are going to be confused why I would run that when the deck's a Lost World deck primarily. This is mainly here for when you don't get that Lost World. It's your recovery engine. You know, it's your anti-deck out card. It is fantastic at 1. Anything more than that would be insane, because this card flat out will never work once you're in Lost World. Ever. You will never get its full ability. You'll probably never get the 6 ability, the draw 2. At most, it's a gauge 2, life 2 then, and there are far better cards for you in that case. Next, we have Buddy Help at 1 copy, 3 gauge, draw 2 cards. It's just more draw power, and it's an extra spell count for Holy Magic. It's nice. And then we have 1 copy of Buddy Block, the nice foily version. It's a great defensive card that comes in useful every now and then, so it's at 1, and it's an extra spell count. I'm not the biggest fan of this card, to be perfectly honest. I know that's weird to say, but when you're playing a defensive deck, it's less useful. Then we have 2 copies of Lost World. Anyone surprised? No? No? Okay, that's the deck. Next, we're going to show off the sideboard. I love sideboards, especially for Magic World, and it's interesting because I mainboard so many generic cards. I had a lot of room for experimenting with different cards. My sideboard, when I started, was like, I mean, it was this. It was 2 cards, and the rest of it I could fill in later. Begone is such an amazing card. It is slightly worse than Abracadabra because it has slightly less versatility, which is why it's in sideboard. But it's so good in certain matchups. You know, you can nullify your opponent's Gargantua Dragon, whatever. They'll cry. It's great against Dimension Dragons. It's great anything that uses size 2 or less, so most decks. Next, we have Chest Break at 2. Set spells are really big right now. You know, between Venom Dragons and Max Dragons and I guess Dimension Dragons and DBS and Imperial Core, and like everyone has at least 1 set spell, including my own deck. I'd love to use this in the mirror match, but I'm pretty sure no one else played this deck at Chicago. Then we have 2 copies of, yes, seriously. We have 2 copies of Guru. We have 2 copies of Guru. Guru's versatile card that is almost never necessary, but I find it good for when I need to push through for damage and whatnot. I did not actually pull this card out of the sideboard in any of my matches that I had in Chicago, but I thought it was worth the experimentation, and it was there in case I needed it. I just happened to not need it, but it's a very fun card to play around with. Next, we have the T's second copy of Teleclair. It's an important card, and especially if you're fighting something. I fought Electro Deities, and I swapped this second copy in. If they're using a lot of cards on field with double, triple attack, that's when you really want it. Then we have 1 copy of Malicious Selector. You'll never use the first ability. It's all about that +3/+3 counterattack and putting into the soul. It's okay. Honestly, it's there if you're fighting someone who's playing risky stuff that doesn't have Soul Guard or protection, so you can get the free counterattack off of it. It's a fun card, but I'm not going to mainboard it. Next, we have 1 extra copy of Abracadabra, because it's Abracadabra. Why wouldn't you run a 3rd in sideboard? Some people would say, well, just run it at 3 in mainboard. No, 2 main, 1 side. And then we have an extra copy of Infector for when I'm fighting one of those matchups where my opponent has a lot of destruction capability. So, hooray. That's the sideboard. And now we're going to show my kind of weird Lost deck. There is some context for this Lost deck, as when I showed up to Chicago with it, it was awful. It was basically just the special deck, like 2 of them mashed together. So we were running a lot of really bad cards at high numbers, and everything else in this was traded for or purchased in Chicago. So it got quite the upgrade. First, we have 4 of the special deck of Vader. It is, I mean, Vanity is just like, I'd say this is honestly the best version of him. I'm serious. Like, the skill's so good. You can bounce or destroy. He's got versatility, the double tech. He's got stats. He's got protection. He's got everything. He's such a fundamentally good card, and he's absolutely devastating if you can get multiple out on board. Also, he's a great budget option because he is cheap, especially compared to some of the others. Next, we've got 3 copies, not 2. 3 copies of this guy. He's just there to seal the deal. My deck is already focused on outvaluing the opponent, so being able to continuously outvalue them with his skill. He's just a big old threat. You know, he's something the opponent definitely wants to waste their resting card on because they don't want to lose the value. You may notice I'm not going to be naming most of these guys because Lost World card names are stupid. Next, we have this guy. I like him. He works for destruction. He synergizes with all your other Lost Vaders. And he has burn, which is important for this deck because the main board's already burning itself between Joe and Holy Magic. So you can definitely cheat out some victories with his effect. Next, we have 2 copies of the Skull. The Skull is probably my favorite card for this deck because my Lost deck, for this deck, because the main deck's so non-aggressive, you really want to focus your Lost deck on killing the opponent. You don't want to waste your draw and charge draw and extra draws if you get them on cards that won't immediately end the game. So having a 5 crit or 4 crit, no, 5 crit Behemoth who also has protection from being rested and stuff is ideal for this deck. He's great. Next, we have 1 copy of this guy. To be honest, I did not play him the entire weekend, and he's leaving the deck soon, so replace him with what you want. Don't use my Lost deck. It's so customized to my play style, but I'm showing it because you might find it interesting. 1 copy of this guy. He hits hard. He's got an anti-stat build. I don't care. Next, we have 1 copy of this guy. He's good. He nullifies the thing, pops it. He's worth keeping at 1, but not more than that. Next, we have 2 copies of the item. I'm still torn on this because it is so perfectly ideal for me when things are going well, but sometimes you go into Lost World because things aren't going well, and in that case, this card is bad. It is one of the cards that you'll draw into, and if you don't already have a field or your gauge and everything, you will brick with it. But it is not that hard to get its conditions met to play it. You either need some gauge or you need cards on the field. That's not so hard. And if you do have those, this card is so good. But I did have 1 occasion at regionals where it was a brick. So that sucks. Next, our best, honestly, Lost World's best defense card. Like, no context. Just for the turn, reducing all damage by 3 with Distortion Wall is... Oh, it is basically counter end your opponent's turn. Oh, it's devastating. And even if they're playing something like Max Dragons and they can hit for far more than that, it don't matter. You've still essentially shut their turn down. Next, we can revive our things. This is very good for reviving things that you've... I've even had times where I've called over a skull with another monster and then revived the skull for 7 crit. It's really funny. Next, we have 2 copies of, what is this card called again? Let's see. Invasion from the Deep and Vile. That's too long of a name for a very good card. Just being able to check top 4, put 2 into hand, 2 into gauge when you're already in Lost World is extremely good. And look at that. I got the fixed backs. That's nice. I was able to exchange mine at regionals for the nice ones. Next, we have 2 copies. Some people might be a little confused of Dimension Wave. This is my favorite spell card for this Lost World deck. Some people might not think it's that good, but the cost is the best part about it because it's just destroy a monster on your field. For a counter, gain 2 gauge, gain 2 life, draw a card. See, the thing with that is destroying a monster on my field is so easy of a cost. Usually when I'm in Lost World, I already got Joe on the field who's got like 7 souls. So it's just free, cycle this card out and gain some resources. It's very good. I like it quite a bit. It will not work super well in a lot of other people's Lost decks, though. Next, we have 2 copies of the Spell Null. Absolutely brutal. The fact that I have access to 4 and 5 if I sideboard Spell Nulls in my deck is so good and makes my opponent very salty. Next, we have 1 copy of Dimension Breeding. Maybe I'd run more of this if I had more. Maybe I wouldn't. I'm still very torn on this card because it is easy for your opponent to get around it. And if you don't have access to any draws from your main deck cards and you go into Lost World and you draw a charge and draw, it is next to impossible to use this. Next, we have 2 copies of the Impact. I should replace these for Secret Arts, I think. But it is just a good card. It ends games. It's one of those things where you say you have this card in your hand, your opponent has nothing to stop it, you got the cost, you win. It's a good card. It is easy to get around. I actually had that in one of my matches. My opponent used it against me, and I countered with a loyalty to reduce the damage by 2. It was really funny. But yeah, it's a good card. Well, that's my deck. Make sure to like this video, subscribe. Let me know what you'd do differently with the deck, or if you're just like, holy crap, that deck seems so memey. And if you end up playing Shadow Shades for like your own regionals and you end up topping with them, give me a shout. Make sure to join our Discord where you can talk more with me about, you know, why Magic World's the best world in Buddyfight, just saying. And also, check out our Instagram. I'll post a picture of something from this deck, probably. I don't know, I'm kind of lazy. Yeah. That's all I got. Check out our Patreon, I guess. Jeez, our outros are getting so long. Check out our Patreon and our shop. Buy some Paper Jacob merch. That's amazing. And I'll see you guys next time.